Hello, my friends, and welcome back to this special bonus Friday episode. We've reached the final part of the NLP workshop series that I've been sharing with you this week, and I hope you've been discovering some new insights into the way you're naturally wired to write. If this is the first episode you've come across, you're absolutely welcome here and a big hello. I'd simply encourage you though to head back and start with Monday's episode when you have the chance, as each part of this workshop series builds on the one before it. For now, we're picking up exactly where we left off on Wednesday and bringing this workshop to its conclusion. So grab your cup of liquid gold, settle in, and let's jump back into the workshop. If you feel called to write a book, but writer's block, procrastination, and self-doubt keep pulling you from the page, you're not alone, and you're not meant to stay stuck. Hi, I'm Madison Michaels, author and life coach, and I've created this podcast as a creative space grounded in faith and mindset transformations to help you break through your blocks, gain creative clarity, and finally finish the book you're meant to write. So grab your cup of liquid gold and let's write the darn book together. All right, so that then leads us to our next slide, which is actually getting words on the page, and how can our modality help with that? So this is actually where your dominant modality really shows up on the page, and you start to notice it quite clearly when you pay attention to it. A visual writer might naturally begin with imagery and setting and movement and very visual descriptions of where the characters are in relation to everything else and everyone else. Whereas an auditory writer might begin with dialogue and voice and rhythm, or the sentence that they can hear most clearly, and that helps them to start getting words on the page. Whereas a kinesthetic writer might begin with the emotional atmosphere of the scene, or a body response that either they or their character has. So that is going to help them actually get words onto the page by accessing the feeling and the emotions behind what's going on in the story. An auditory digital writer might begin with logic and structure and motivation, that clear sense of, okay, where is this scene beginning? Where does it need to end? How are my characters going to get there in between? So they really get that sense of what the scene is doing. Now that is useful, knowing those different pathways in, because your natural strength is the doorway into the draft. And often if you are feeling a bit resistant to writing or a bit stuck, if you focus on what you are naturally strongest at in terms of your modality, that can actually help you to start getting words onto the page. But here's the thing to keep in mind, all right? Your first draft doesn't need to be fully layered with all of those modalities at first. If you are an auditory writer and you write dialogue really well, and that's the easy way for you to access your writing, then go and write dialogue. You can come back later in your revisions and you can layer in those visual details or the kinesthetic feeling, emotional details. But get down what is working for you on the page. If you're visual, you might start with all the vivid imagery of the scene. You really set the characters up where they are in relation to the scene, and that's really such a great strength. But then you might be missing all the dialogue and the feelings and the structure and logic of the scene, but you can layer that in later in revisions. Get what works for you down onto the page, all right? And really access your main modalities to do that. It's going to make your job a lot easier to do. So if you're visual, start with what you can see, okay? The room, the light, the expression on your character's face, the strongest image in the moment for that scene. If you're auditory, start with what you can hear. Could be the dialogue, the tone of voice, the rhythm of the conversation, the sentence that keeps repeating in your mind. If you're kinesthetic, start with what can be felt in either your body or in the character's body. what the emotion is, the body response, the pressure in the room, that tension in the air, what the character might be carrying underneath the surface. And if you're auditory digital, start with what makes sense. So what does each character want? What's their goal, their motivation, and their conflict in that scene? What's the next logical action that they're going to take? Remember, you are allowed to draft from your strongest doorway first. The other layers can come later, and we're about to talk about that because that's what revision is for. When you hit a block midway through a scene, come back to your main doorway. So visual, you might ask yourself, what can I see next? And you might sit there for about 30 to 60 seconds and actually try to imagine the scene continuing. Now, if you're auditory, ask yourself, what does the character say next? And listen for what they say and then write it down. If you're kinesthetic, you might ask yourself, what is this character feeling right now? And feel it in your own body. Auditory digital, you might ask, what needs to happen next? Okay, and that keeps the blocks from becoming a full stop because you are accessing back through your natural modality. Now, the aim here certainly isn't in the drafting stage to actually have every layer perfect. That's not the aim at all. The aim is to stay connected to your story so that you can stay in the writing long enough to get to the finish line and to keep finishing it to write it. Okay, so write the image or write the voice, write the emotional feeling or write the logic. Let that, whatever is your main dominant modality, get you back onto the page. And then later, in revisions, you can come back and ask what else the scene needs, which leads us to our actual revision and editing. And this is where modalities can be so useful. I actually get 4 highlighters when I am revising a scene, and I select a color for each of the different modalities, and I go through and I highlight, okay, where's something visual with one color? Where's something auditory with another? Where is something kinesthetic? So where's my feelings and emotions on the page with the third color? And then for my auditory digital, I look at the motivation and does the actual scene make sense? Does, the continuity work? So I go through in layers and actually see what could be missing in my first draft. Because often, if we are approaching our first draft from our main modality, and we usually do this without even thinking about it or having that awareness that that's what we're doing, we will tend to gravitate to whatever that main modality is. So if you've ever had an editor or one of your readers say, you need to add in more description, or there needs to be more emotion in this scene, or your dialogue is sounding a bit stiff, it might be because that is not your natural tendency in terms of your modality. So you gravitate to your natural tendency and you tend to not focus on the other ones. So by having that awareness of the different modalities, that can really help you to approach your revisions in a different way. And it can sometimes make revisions fun because most writers, and myself included, get revisions and you think, oh no, I've got a lot of work to do. But by layering in the different modalities, that can be gold in terms of actually working out where you can strengthen your writing so that the readers relate to it more. Because remember, your readers have their own modalities too. So if you want to really appeal to a large space of readers, then you do want to touch on all of the modalities in your writing. Now, that doesn't mean that you must have every single modality in every single sentence, not at all. But it is useful to layer them in to make sure that your scene and your story is honestly the best you can make it. And using the modalities is going to help you do that. So you might want to look at, each different pass with a different layer in terms of the modalities. So go through it, start with your main modality for that pass, and then move on to the others. So for example, if you're a visual writer, go through it and have a look at the imagery, have a look at the setting. Is it all working? Usually it probably is, because if your main modality is the one you access first, that's usually your strength. So look at it through that lens, then go to the next modality. So you're going to look at the auditory aspect of your scene. So is the voice consistent? Is the dialogue strong? What's going on here with the voice and the characters? If you take the speech tags away, can you tell clearly that it is different characters speaking, or do they all sound the same? So that's a really good way of revising. You can then move on to the kinesthetic component. So you look at the feeling and the emotion of the scene. Is their emotion strong enough? Is the reader actually being allowed to feel what the characters are experiencing too? Or is it all just talking heads? Or is it all just description? So all of these modalities layer in really nicely together to give a really good picture. Then the last layer would be looking at it from an AD perspective. Does the character motivation make sense? Is the scene actually fulfilling a purpose? Is it progressing the story along? Is it there for a reason? Yeah. So a modality approach way of looking at revisions really gives you a much calmer way in terms of the revision process, and also very practical tools to be able to layer in more depth into your story. So instead of seeing everything at once, revise in layers, all right? Because that's really going to help you to understand what is being felt, what's being seen, what's being heard, and what's being clarified on the pages. And then you can layer in and add what you need to. So the approach itself is especially helpful because it removes some of the pressure. You're not trying to write the perfect scene all in one go. You're reminding yourself that you're building it layer by layer. You're starting with your dominant modality for the first draft, and then as you revise, you're going to layer in other levels of modalities. Now, your modality is usually, like I said, the first pass, because that's where you access things more naturally. So that's going to be your strength. And I would then deliberately move through the other layers. Because remember, revision is not proof that you've failed at the draft. It's actually proof that you've succeeded in writing, and revision is your chance to deepen the reader's experience. And it's where your story becomes richer and fuller and clearer, and stronger and so much more alive on the page. All right, so I want to really bring this into a practical component for the masterclass in terms of what to do in your very next writing session, because this is where the work becomes real. I don't want you leaving today thinking, oh, that was interesting, and then going back to exactly the same writing process that could be making writing feel hard for you sometimes. I want you to choose one modality-based adjustment to try. All right, so if you're visual, you might adjust through looking at the visual side of a scene before you write it. So you might take 60 seconds before your next session and just sit, close your eyes, and let the image of the scene come to you. It could be one strong image, or it could be a movie, whatever it is. You could even use a mind map to actually visually draw some stuff, or a reference image to focus on and just let the images come to you. You could also use sticky notes or a cue card. Any of those tools for a visual writer is going to help you open the doorway to your scene. If you're auditory, then your adjustment might be to listen for the dialogue. So listen for what your character's saying, or hear the tone or rhythm of how they're saying something. You could even look at reading your last paragraph of writing out loud to get you back into that auditory modality and unlock your doorway back into the scene. You could also talk through your scene before you draft it. So even just brain kind of storming aloud what you're going to be writing about, that can help you to access your story and bring it back onto the page. You might even use some music to stimulate your imagination, or silence can help too, depending on where you sit on the auditory scale. Now, if you're kinesthetic, your adjustment might be to move or ground yourself before you start writing. So you could go for a 5-minute walk and start thinking or feeling your story. You could also put your hand on your heart and just feel and breathe into that space to reconnect with your characters and what they're feeling. You could also ask, what does this scene feel like? What's the emotion my characters are experiencing in it? And notice your own body's response. Let the emotional truth lead you into your writing. Now, if you're auditory digital, your adjustment might be to talk the scene out loud. So you could write one focused prompt. You could outline the next small step. And it doesn't have to be the entire chapter. It could just be that scene that you are mapping out and outlining to give yourself that container where you have enough structure to feel safe, but you can keep moving with your writing. You can keep continuing to write. Now, this is important. Choose one, okay? We're not redesigning your entire writing life today. We're just running a small experiment because that's how you build a writing process that actually works for how you are wired to write. You try something, you notice what changes, then you adjust it, and you keep going. So take a moment and ask yourself, what's one shift I'm going to try in my very next writing session? And if you're joining live, pop it into the chat because I'd love to see what you're choosing. All right, so that leads us now to our modality revision checklist. And that's just a way of doing a quick pass to make sure that your writing is as strong as it can be so the reader can really experience your story fully. So the simplest way to work with your modalities is inside your manuscript itself, and it makes a lot of sense when you start seeing the words on the page and likening them to each modality. But when you revise a scene, move through these 4 questions. First, see it. So can the reader see the scene? So can they picture where the scene is at, where the characters are, etc.? Is there enough visual detail to place them in the moment? You don't need to describe everything, okay? You're choosing the specific details that can anchor the reader into the scene and setting. The second question is hear it. Can you hear the dialogue, the voice, and the rhythm? So does the dialogue sound natural for these characters? Is the pacing or the cadence working? And this is where reading it out loud actually becomes really helpful, even if you're not primarily auditory, because you can still access that auditory component of your mind's processing. So read it aloud and ask those questions. The third question is about feeling it. So can the reader feel the emotion? So have you shown the atmosphere, the tension, or the body response clearly? Does the emotional weight actually land on the page, or is it still only living inside the character's head? So think about that one. Now, the fourth one is to clarify it. Does the scene make sense? So do the characters' motivations actually feel authentic? Does the scene flow logically? Does it have a purpose in the wider story itself? So those questions are going to really help you to strengthen what is on the page. Now, I do want to say something very gently here. This is not a perfection checklist. Okay, so you're not using this to beat up your scene. You're not using this to prove that your draft is terrible. You're using this list to notice what might be missing. And there's a big difference because perfectionism says this scene isn't good enough, therefore I'm not good enough. Whereas revision says this scene is becoming something and I can strengthen it one layer at a time. And that's the energy I want you to bring to this checklist. Curious, specific, compassionate, and practical. And if you only do one thing after today, take one scene from your manuscript and run it through these 4 passes. See it, hear it, feel it, and clarify it. And you will learn so much about your natural strengths and the places where your writing can become richer and deeper. And that's what it's about, isn't it? As writers, we always want to grow and improve our writing craft. And this is how you can do it quite easily too. All right, so let's bring this together. So in terms of your writing stages and your modality influencing all of those stages, remember, when you're brainstorming and coming up with your story ideas, use the modality that feels most natural for you to do that, okay? In the imagination stage, remember that your modality shapes how the ideas arrive, and it could be through images, through voices, through feelings, through concepts and ideas and structure. And this is your first doorway. In the writing stage, your modality shapes what flows most naturally onto the page itself. So the words that you actually write. So it could be description, dialogue, emotion, clarity, rhythm, structure, the sensory experience that's on the page. And in the revision stage, your modality helps you to know where to begin, and using the other modalities can actually help you strengthen what might be missing on the page, because you naturally gravitate towards one main modality over the others. The goal isn't to force every stage to feel the same. The goal is to work with your wiring in each stage, and that could be different for each stage. Okay, so you might naturally imagine visually, but when it comes to writing, you might actually hear your characters' voices and your strength might be dialogue. And when it comes to revising, you might actually revise through auditory digital, through logic and seeing, does it make sense? And that is absolutely all fine. It is what works best for you and how you are wired to write. So remember, you can, access a book, you can start it visually, you can draft it emotionally, and then you might revise it logically. Or you could begin the complete opposite. You might begin with a concept. You might talk through the chapters and then you add imagery in later in your revision. There's only the question to be asked: what helps you access your story with the most trust, clarity, and consistency? And that question to ask yourself is so much more useful than asking why you just can't write like somebody else. Because you're not here to write like somebody else. You're here to become the writer that your book needs you to be. And the more you understand your own process, the less energy you waste fighting yourself, and the more energy can go back into where it belongs, to actually writing your manuscript and into your words. All right, my friends, that leads us to our last slide, and I'll be taking questions in a moment. But essentially, I want you to remember that this is a starting point for you, okay? It is not a box, and your writing process certainly doesn't need to look like anyone else's to actually work beautifully for you. When you understand your mind, writing does become more natural and more sustainable and much more in alignment with how you are uniquely wired to write. Now, that doesn't mean that every writing session will suddenly become easy, although I wish it would. And it also doesn't mean that resistance is never going to show up again, or you'll never have a hard chapter to write, or you'll never get to that messy middle, or a day when the words feel slow. Of course you will. But what it does mean is that you can stop interpreting every hard moment as evidence that you're failing. And instead, you can start asking better questions and more useful questions about what is going on for you in that moment. So what modality am I trying to write through right now? What does this scene need? What does my mind need before I can access the words? And am I trying to force a process that doesn't fit me and how I am wired to write? So those questions are going to be so useful to you in terms of how writing can become less like a battle and more of a relationship with yourself and your own creative wiring. So your next step from here is really simple. If you haven't yet taken the quiz, go to madisonmichaels.com/quiz and discover more about your writing personality and your modality and how you are wired to create. If you also want more support, come and listen to my podcast, Write the Darn Book, where I teach both the inner and the outer work of finishing your book, so the mindset and the craft. And look, if this episode, or rather this session that we're doing, this masterclass, has made you actually realize that you would like some deeper support and you'd like to explore how you are uniquely wired to write, then I am running some writing personality blueprint sessions. They're one-off, one-on-one, 1-hour Zoom sessions where we look at your unique wiring, specifically your writing personality, and then we translate that into practical strategies tailored specifically to you and your actual writing life and what works for you. But most of all, I really want to leave you today with remembering this. You are the vessel for your story. You honestly are. You just have to let the words flow through you and onto the page. And that is what your NLP modalities is going to help you to do, to access the way you process and get information and access your imagination and then bring it forth onto the page. So thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to shift and see what happens in terms of your writing. So let me know how you go. And look, does anyone have questions? I'll take them now. I will stop the recording though for those of you on the replay. But thank you for listening if you are watching this as a replay, and take care. I'll see you guys soon. Well, my friends, we've reached the end of this special 3-part workshop series for this week, and I just want to thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you've come away with a deeper understanding of yourself as a writer and with some practical tools that you can begin using the very next time you sit down to the page. Before we finish, I want to leave you with one final thought. Writing isn't about becoming someone else. It isn't about trying to fit into somebody else's process or following every piece of advice that you read online. It's about learning to trust the writer that you already are inside. And when you understand how you're uniquely wired to create and you give yourself permission to write in a way that works for you, that's when the words begin to flow more naturally and your confidence starts to grow and finishing your book becomes so much more achievable. And that's exactly what I want for you. And remember, you are the vessel for your story. So let the words flow through you and onto the page. Until next time, my friends, take care and let's write the darn book together. My friend, I hope today's episode gave you exactly what you needed for your writing journey. And if it did, would you take 30 seconds to share it with another writer who's struggling to start or finish their book? And if you're loving the show, I'd be so grateful if you left a quick review. It means the world to me and truly makes my day to know that this podcast is helping you. And as you head back into your week, I hope you feel more supported and connected to your creativity. And remember, you're a vessel for the story. So let the words flow through you and onto the page. All right, I'm off to refill my cup of liquid gold and go and do a little writing of my own. Take care, and I'll meet you back here in the next episode of Write the Darn Book.